Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Spiritual Journey podcast. We're on episode 167. I always love starting this podcast by saying thank you. I feel so very blessed with this podcast, with the number of people it's reaching. I feel very guided by it. And really, I started this podcast just to simplify spirituality and guide people on their journey. So, everybody that sends me messages, everyone sends us messages. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Hi, my name is Nims. I'm an Akashic record reader, Akashic trainer, podcast host, podcast creator, as well as spiritual coach and mentor. And I love guiding people to be truly authentic, truly become themselves, removing all the programming that we hold on to, everything we've been through to truly shine our light in the way it's meant to. We're being pushed right now. Lots of stuff happening inside us. And I love that I get to guide people. We have a beautiful mentorship program that we use to guide people. We offer a free discovery call to really talk about how we can support you. So please do book that free discovery call. This podcast wouldn't be where it is without my co-host, my beautiful co-host, introducing the amazing Stacey Brown. Stacey, over to you.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me. My name is Stacey. I'm an intuitive. I do readings for people from around the world. I'm also an Akashic record reader, a spiritual coach and mentor, and a recently published author. My book, Journey to Soul Center, Discovering the Gift of Surrender, is available on Amazon and Audible. And I am really looking forward to getting into this topic today, Nims.
Yeah, so am I. So this week is all about embracing vulnerability, and the fact that the fact is the key to authentic spiritual growth. And one of the most vulnerable people I know that can be so authentic and vulnerable in public spaces these days. And it's just, being yourself and being vulnerable is healing for you as well as the other person. And, when I first connected with you, when I first met you, I wanted to talk to you because of how vulnerable you're being. So you've been a great example to me of the power of vulnerability, the power of truly sharing at a soul level. I always have the intention of sharing at a soul level. And I know that a lot of the time when I share, I channel. So it's not really my truth, it's universal truth. But sharing your story, sharing your journey, sharing your vulnerability is a superpower. And Stacey, I really believe you have it, probably more than anyone I know. I always tell you your vulnerability is a superpower, and you always kind of give me that weird look. But I really do believe it is. And our connection I really think was started by you sharing from the heart and sharing so vulnerably. So thank you for doing that. So when I ask you the question, vulnerability and how important it is to spiritual growth, how does that make you feel?
Vulnerable, you're in a space of humility. And when you're in a space of humility, you're better able to receive what's coming to you, whatever that is, whatever messages you're getting, whatever impressions you're getting, whatever it is that's churning within you, to me, has more of a space when we're humble. And when we're humble, we're vulnerable. And, it's interesting because you talk about it as a superpower, but it's something that makes me so uncomfortable even now. I get on a podcast episode and share my heart, and I do this on social media, and I do it with my business in every way possible. I try to be open and vulnerable, but it's not easy because there's definitely, I think, a stigma that when we're vulnerable, we're weak. And I don't believe that that's the case. I believe when we're vulnerable and we're open, we are better able to serve other people and to let them know that we're coming from an authentic space. So it's something that I feel kind of happened to me. I don't know that I necessarily made the choice consciously that I was going to be vulnerable. But 5 years ago, I went through something horrifically traumatic with my son. And it opened me up in a way that I've never been open before. And I've stayed open and in that space of vulnerability ever since that situation transpired. And it's something that You say to me like you should be proud of this and that kind of thing. But for me, there's still a lot of insecurity that comes around being vulnerable.
That's the point. I mean, sharing vulnerably is hard to do because you're sharing part of your soul, right? It's sharing a part of you at such a deep level. And there's really a fine line between what I call trauma dumping, kind of, oh my God, look at me, that's where I think the stigma comes from, is because some people use the trauma as their identity. And it's never about what happens to us. It's about how we respond to what happens to us. You, through your vulnerability, and again, I'm using you as an example. I guess it's easier for me to see what's happened to you, through my eyes, right? And it's that whenever you've shared vulnerability, you've shared from the heart, and that's why we connected. Because it's like when you share vulnerably and you share from the heart, the other person hears you at a soul level, and that's how they feel connected to you, because they know that you're speaking to the heart. And that's why when you share, Stace, you take people on a journey and they feel like they're there with you, because you're sharing. You have to relive that vulnerable moment. It's the only way you can share. And you'll always say things like, there's only one way I can be. And it's kind of true. It's like, if you choose to be vulnerable, you choose to share. But here's the thing: when you're vulnerable and you share from the heart, the other person hears you, but you also heal yourself as you share. And in many ways, you also heal the other person, because the more you share, maybe there's a part of their story they relate to. I mean, I've heard you share on Clubhouse or wherever, and you can hear in people's responses how much you touch their heart and how much you kind of help them to heal. And so it's like, it's always about your intention. Check in with your intention. If you're being vulnerable to speak, then maybe. But if you're being heard, if you were speaking to be heard, to share your story, to heal, then just as long as your intention is there, then people will hear you. And I really believe that the things we've been through for a reason. Yes, we've been through to heal this human journey, to release karma from past lives, but also ancestral. But I also believe that everything we've been through has been our training ground for whatever we're here to do. It stays through what you've been through and the vulnerability you've been through, you've shared. I've seen you heal so much. I've seen you activate as a healer. So yeah, when I say it's your superpower, that's what I mean, is that you share so authentically that people hear you, and as you share, you're healing yourself, you're activating yourself in some kind of way, and you're also activating the other person. Does that make sense?
And I definitely think there's something very liberating for people when somebody is vulnerable, because it's almost like you're creating an invitation for the other person to be vulnerable, right? When you express yourself in that way, in that heartfelt way. I mean, we've seen it countless times on this podcast where I've, shared something very raw and real and vulnerable. And then we get inundated with messages of people saying, I can relate, or I was so touched by that. It's definitely a way to create more connection, because people can tell when you're sharing from that heart-centered space.
Yeah, no, it's very true. And that is the point, right? That's what I said. It's that, what's your intention? People can feel your intention. People can feel, you know, when you were talking about how it can feel uncomfortable, and that is partly your ego talking, right? That is our ego. And it's like, that's what I mean about where you're sharing from. Because sometimes if you're sharing from your ego, then that's when you're not being truly authentic. And, what if you can talk to your ego and say that you don't need protecting, you don't, and, but again, I have to recognize it's hard. It's just, um, sometimes I do look at our conversations, and it's not like I don't want to be vulnerable. I really do feel like I share from the heart. I just think that in that area, it is your superpower, right? So it's really interesting. I mean, I remember when I decided I want to share more of this spiritual journey on social media. It was a few years ago, and I was still in the corporate world, and there was a part of me that was worried about being judged. There was a part of me that kind of was worried that this corporate image I'd built what was going to be the reaction of all these corporate, if I all of a sudden start talking about spiritual journey, awakening, kind of dark night of the soul. I think for some people in the corporate world, it's kind of, it's kind of up in the sky, right? Woo-woo type stuff. And I admit for a while I was nervous, but then I kind of kept getting reminded that I'm on this spiritual journey. I am who I am. And so what I try and do is how I do one thing is how I do everything. And that's why I always come back to intention. It's just, I really, really believe the reason that we've been through so much of the last few years is because for many of us, we're kind of going through things, so we're also meant to teach other people. And how can you teach other people unless you share your story, unless you share vulnerably, so people hear that connection? I've always had people to push me. When I started the podcast, I had, the friend Sabi who pushed me to start the podcast. And again, I was overthinking. I was like, oh my God, do I have the right equipment? Is anyone going to hear me? And it's just, in the end, I just started and I did it and it just carried on. And even going live on social media and sharing on social media, I had another friend, Venetia, who pushed me to do that. So it's like, I've always had those guides that kind of push me, that kind of expand me in whatever way to share authentically and be vulnerable. And I am comfortable in front of the camera. I'm comfortable sharing whatever question comes up. And, it's just that, I don't even know how to put it into words. It is sharing from the heart with the intention of guiding somebody. And I remember when we were working on your book, you always had the vision of, because if you knew how many people were going to read it, I think it would have consumed you. So you focus on that one person, right? That one person. And maybe that makes it easier for people to share publicly. Is if you focus on helping one person, maybe that makes it easier. I'll always say that my purpose is anyone I connect with, help leave them better than I found them. And that means every day, if just one person listens to the podcast and makes a difference to them, then I've completed my purpose. So, maybe for those listening, if you're struggling to be vulnerable publicly, then maybe you just share, focused on the one person that may make a difference to. And sharing vulnerability in relationships one-to-one, obviously you're going to build a stronger connection with somebody if you're truly authentic with who you are and you share vulnerably. And it's always interesting. It's like the male-female dynamic is always seen that females are better to, supposedly better to be more vulnerable and share their emotions, whereas the masculine energy is regarded generally as struggles to hide, to share their emotions. And I talk quite often about how we are moving into the age of the feminine, and I do feel the masculine in us is struggling. That's why, for me, the timing of this episode is so important. It's allowing the masculine in us to be activated to also truly share from a vulnerable perspective. But Stacey, when you were when you were writing your book and the whole journey of being vulnerable in the book to share your story, and kind of you knew that people were going to read it, how did that make you feel?
Terrified. I mean, it really did, because I knew when I was writing my book that I was not writing the story of some, heroine who conquers it all and makes everything happen and does it divinely and with beautiful purpose. Like, I was talking about my messy world and some of the decisions that I had made that, to say I've been married 4 times. It's not easy to put that in a book. It's not easy to have the world scrutinize the decisions that you've made in your life, especially when you're scrutinizing them yourself, right? I'm looking at it and I'm like, oh my gosh, I got married the first time when I was 18 years old. What did I know when I was 18? Right? Like, and yet, if I wanted the story to be out there and be real and be authentic, I had to share all parts of myself, even the parts that were something that I might otherwise be ashamed of. And it was such a process. It was so daunting. But I do use the tactic when I'm on the podcast or when I was writing my book or anytime I'm being open and vulnerable, I try to just picture one person. And podcast, I envision, a woman who's been listening to the podcast for a really long time. She feels really isolated and alone in her journey. And when she listens to the podcast, she feels connected and she feels like she's not crazy for the experiences that she's having. And I'm open with her because I want her to know that she doesn't have to go through this alone. I want her to know that there's an avenue that can help you to get through transitioning your life and get through the challenging times. And so I just picture that one woman listening to the podcast. I don't think of the hundreds of people or the thousands of people that are going to listen, because if I do, I get completely freaked out. But I focus on that one person that I know is listening and has been listening on a consistent basis. And I think about who I am and what I've been through and how can I bring that space to her? How can I make a space where it's more comfortable for her to speak her truth? And the best way I can do that is by being open on this podcast. And I'm open about so much, right? Like it's not like there's just one area of my life that I'm open and vulnerable with. And I think that's one of the things that people need to realize when it comes to vulnerability is that just select the areas that you're going to be vulnerable. When you're showing up authentically, you're vulnerable in all areas. You're showing up like as an open book. And when you do that, that's the space where people can truly feel connected, because that's at the core of who you are, right? You're going through talking about experiences that you might not otherwise be proud of life decisions that you've made, etc. And you're doing it in a space where you're showing all of you. And when you're showing all of you, you can't just be selective and say, okay, I'm going to be open and vulnerable about this part of myself, but not about this part of myself. And I think that's the thing that gets really challenging, but that gets maybe is that, oh my gosh, if I'm vulnerable, I realize I can't hide. And that not being able to hide can be a very scary thing because you don't know how people are going to receive your truth.
And that's really super interesting because we can't really control what other people think. But when you look at social media and you look at kind of what other people are portraying, a lot of people, they're portraying what they think other people want to see. And it's almost like portraying a life of, I don't know, dreams, luxury. But ultimately, we are souls having human experience. And, you talked about making mistakes and being vulnerable and sharing. Who's to say there's a mistake, right? We're a soul having human experience, which means that we've been on a roller coaster. We've been up and down. We've done things that maybe in hindsight we should have done differently. But it's like sometimes we're kidding ourselves, right? Sometimes we kind of hide the deep, dark secrets about ourselves that we kind of don't want to be vulnerable about because we're worried about what people are going to judge us. But, they say the truth will set you free. So, for me, the way I try and be is how I do one thing is how I do everything. So it's that, when I try and share, I'm sharing from the heart. And, when I'm speaking to somebody, I'm sharing from the heart. It's that, and there is power to that, right? But it's just, just as a listener, think about who you're more drawn to when you look at, maybe when you listen to podcasts or maybe, kind of, you know, who you follow on Insta or whatever, right? Is that, do you follow those type of people that are being raw and being real? Or do you follow those that potentially are portraying a life that may not be authentic? Who knows, right? But maybe that helps you a little bit to truly understand what you're like. And another question I'd ask our listeners is, what areas in your life are you being authentic and being vulnerable and sharing? And the areas where you're not being vulnerable and sharing, are you being truly honest with yourself? Because that is sometimes we do worry about being judged. Of course, as humans, we want to receive love, and we don't want to be hurt. Those are our two basic needs. So, when we share vulnerably, there's a part of us that's always going to think, well, hold on, how are we going to be judged? And it's true, of course. We want to receive love, but I always love the phrase that what other people think of me is none of my business. I can't control what people think. And, Stace, a lot of the messages we get about this podcast is about you and how vulnerable you are and how much you've shared and how people can really relate to your story. So I know there's a power in being vulnerable because I've seen it in action, right? And also as far as how it affects our spiritual journey, you went through so much with your son, which you touched on earlier, but also part of that journey was also you being activated as a healer. And then the next stage of you being activated as a healer is you sharing it so vulnerable in your book and on public stages. So I've seen what being vulnerable on the spiritual journey can be, and how the healer in us can be activated. But again, for me, it's always down to being authentic. Because again, some people it's because they want to share their trauma, right? They want to bond together because of their trauma. It's always down to your intention. If you're being vulnerable and sharing from the heart because you want to help and guide other people, then that's beautiful. But if you're looking for sympathy, then maybe check in with yourself. And when I'm listening for me to give sympathy, great. But as Stace, when you're sharing, I know that it's making you feel uncomfortable, and it's like I think you share because you really want to share a piece of you, but also maybe that piece of you is going to help that one person. That's what I feel, and I think that's a great example for our listeners, that truly be authentic is a big part of our spiritual journey, because when we do that, these deep dark places that we've kept hidden all of a sudden are no longer hidden, and all of a sudden we're exposed to the world. It's just an interesting time. I'm sure for you it's been interesting in terms of releasing. And yeah, I think I feel like I'm an open book. I share my journey in terms of everything I've been through. But yeah, I really do feel that you're vulnerable. I'm curious. Earlier, I mentioned the male and the female, and kind of how there's expectations of how much of a male should share and how much a female should share. What's your experience of that?
There's this stigma about being vulnerable in general, but I also think that when it comes to men, we have this kind of social stigma that men are not supposed to be emotional and they're not supposed to be vulnerable. And I've got to tell you, I go back to the same thing. I admire when a man is open and vulnerable and shares from the heart. That to me is powerful, and that makes me want to pay attention to what's being said, because there's a whole different vibration of what comes through when you're in that space where you're sharing authentically and openly. So I definitely think that society tells us one thing, but I think that overall, if you were to ask women what they want, they'd probably say they want a man who can be vulnerable. They want a man who can be emotional, right? They want somebody who's in touch with their feelings and can share from the heart. And it's a beautiful thing when you can. It's just not easy. It is not easy, my friends. And it is something that, even with all the episodes of this podcast that we've done and all the things that I've shared, I still get a little bit of stage fright every time we record, because I wonder, oh boy, what's going to come through today? What am I going to share today, or how is this going to be received? But I know no other way to be at this point. I know I want to help people, and I believe that we are better equipped to help people from the space of what our own personal experiences have been. And sometimes the ones that we're not so proud of are some of the biggest learning pieces that we have in our toolbox to be able to help people. And so, one person, by being open and vulnerable, then it's worth it, right? If I can get one person to say, you know what, I can't do this alone. Like, I think there are so many people that think that this spiritual journey and this path, that they're supposed to be able to just figure it out on their own. And I don't believe that that's the way that we're meant to work. I believe that we're meant to go through experiences where other people are helping us. And to me, it's like we're all running a marathon, and some of us are a little bit further in the race than others. And we have a responsibility to turn back to the people behind us and warn them about what's ahead. Right. And so that's kind of what I do, is I want to make sure that what I'm putting out there is the most transparent version of me. And I think there's also something very liberating about doing that, because you take away the power of other people to judge you for your decisions, because you're putting it out there regardless. You're saying, I'm going to be myself and I'm going to show up as myself, regardless of how other people receive it. And then it takes away the power of the secrecy that we sometimes feel in not being vulnerable, in holding back.
Yeah, super, super powerful. That nervousness before we record, before we do anything public, and I have to say I'm much more comfortable now than it was before. But even that little bit of nervousness, I think keeps us grounded. It keeps us kind of honest. I don't know if I'd ever want to lose that. But yeah, I mean, I've seen you often be anxious and be super anxious about something and do it anyway. And I always look at that and think, wow, that's really cool. I'm sure it's not cool being that anxious, but it's cool that you do it anyway. But I do want to go back to this the societal pressure for us to be perfect and portray a certain image. It's really interesting, right? And I do feel like there's a shift, and there has been for a while, for people to be real, for people to be, not perfect. Because what does perfect even mean? Who on this planet is perfect, right? We're on this. We're a soul having this human. So we make mistakes, we stumble, and isn't that the beauty of social media and all these platforms to truly share your life story? I mean, I know when I read books and stuff, I want to be, I normally, read more spiritual books, but I want people to be authentic. I feel people's energy. And I actually, that's the other thing. I think I feel that we know when we're being authentic. So again, as listeners, if you're having conversation with somebody, be present and listen and just feel that person. And you feel, and really maybe ask yourself, do you feel they're being authentic? Can your heart hear what they're saying? And there's a power in active listening in a one-to-one relationship. You can help the other person be authentic by truly listening. How often are we in a conversation and we're thinking about what we're going to have for dinner, or maybe we're responding to a text or something else? We're on a phone call. We're not actually being present. But try it. Be present in a discussion. Be present. Truly listen to the other person and see how they change. See how vulnerable they become. And then again, in that conversation, if you start being truly authentic and sharing your vulnerability, then again, see how the other person responds. I really believe it's a big impact on the relationships we have if we speak authentically and we speak from the heart. And why don't you try it? You can listen to me and Stacey and talk about it and the impact it has had on our lives. But actually, the best thing for me is for our listeners to try it and report back. Just you being authentic. But again, as I said earlier, being authentic and being vulnerable is sharing from the heart, not just sharing a story that you think is more kind of intense than maybe the next person. It's more about, let's say you perceive that you made a mistake. What did you learn from that mistake? How did you grow? Stacey, whenever I always hear you talk about stories with your son and stuff, you'll always talk about the lesson that you got from. So maybe that's the key, is when you're sharing your vulnerability, when you're sharing your story, I feel it's important that we have to talk about, what do we learn from that? What do we learn from those almost difficult times? And even when we talk to ourselves, looking in the mirror, maybe that's a great place to start. What's the hardest thing you've had to go through? And have you truly expressed how you felt about it to yourself? And then expressed how much you grew? Because again, sometimes I really believe that we're not even vulnerable to ourselves. It's not like we're hiding stuff from somebody else. We're actually hiding it to ourselves. So, how do you make sure, Stace, that you're honest with yourself and you're vulnerable to yourself?
Analyze what I'm going to share. I never script it. I never think about, okay, I think I'm going to talk about this, or I think I'm going to talk about that. I do a trust fall. I literally say to myself before I go into any situation where I'm going to share, Be open to whatever is meant to come through. Space that I share from. I don't think, oh, I'm going to share about this today, or I'm going to talk about this and I'm going to be open about it. I don't think about any of that. I go where I'm prompted to go and I follow that prompting. And whatever that prompting tells me, that's what I share.
That's beautiful, and that's what this whole podcast is, right? We don't script it. We don't, whatever comes through, right? But I guess, is there any area of your life where you're not being honest with yourself? That's what the question is. Is that, when you look in the mirror and you're having a conversation with yourself, how do you make sure you're being authentic and kind of expose the deep dark areas of your life that maybe, like your inner child. I know I've done a lot of inner child work where I've called out my inner child and I've been honest. It's that, because our inner child sometimes just needs our love, needs our attention, and I'm sure we've all been through stuff as kids, right? And it's that having an honest conversation with yourself about how you feel, getting annoyed, getting angry, releasing it, I think is a powerful thing to do. So what's your advice to people who, just maybe the first stage to start is to be true to themselves, to be authentic and vulnerable to themselves? What would you advise people to do?
Thing. And being in a space where it's you and your thoughts and allowing those words to flow on the paper without you judging them. And I think the first place when we're going to start something new or try to start something new, we've got to kind of do it independently in a space where we feel safe. And so for me, writing has always felt safe. Journaling has always felt safe. That's a space that I can go to between me and myself and I and my thoughts, right? So I would tell anybody who is embarking on the journey of being more open about who you are, where you've been, what you've been through, to start with the process of writing, because it's about you and the words on the page. And you're not sharing with anybody else at that point, but you're sharing with yourself and being open with yourself about where you are. And I think anybody who's going to start the practice of vulnerability has to start somewhere. And I think it's a very private thing. So starting with writing gives you a space that's safe where you can maybe process some of the things that you're thinking about sharing. And then from that space, I think it's about calling upon your inner circle, your good friends, those people that you feel close and connected with, and starting by sharing with them, right? I mean, are you open with the people who are close to you? Are you vulnerable with them? I mean, I wouldn't recommend to everybody jumping on a social media platform like I did and sharing everything vulnerably. That might not work for everybody. But I definitely think that there's something to be said for the power of vulnerability with people that you're close to and you feel safe with, and that allowing you a space to kind of nurture that part of yourself that you might not otherwise be in touch with.
Great advice. And I mean, I love journaling, but the other thing I also love is having a conversation with myself in the mirror. Is really connecting through my eyes, one eye, just kind of just talking to my soul that way and having a real honest conversation with myself. The other thing sometimes I do is I talk to my soul, or I talk to God, source, whatever you want, and just have a real honest conversation. And about being angry, being annoyed, it's a great way to process. Sometimes it's hard to talk to our loved ones, and in weird ways. I remember when I first went on Clubhouse, at the time it was a bunch of strangers. At the time you were a stranger, right? So sometimes sharing vulnerably your story to some people you don't know, like using this social media app like Clubhouse, or we've been on Chatter recently, where you have different topics and you have different spaces. I've seen people come into those type of spaces and share things they've never shared with their friends. And I mean, I know the rooms that we host, Stace, we have the intention of having a safe space. So I agree, jumping on Instagram and doing a live is probably because you're going to have a lot of friends that follow you, but social audio could also be another option, right? Because I know, like, I find Chatter, when just as lockdown was hitting, so all of the social interactions in person I was having all of a sudden stopped. And yes, we try and keep stuff going on phone calls and Zoom and whatever else we did, but actually finding a space to be able to speak consciously, I really do feel Clubhouse gave me that when I needed it most. And I feel like my ability to share and speak from the heart, I think I feel like Clubhouse was also a big part of that. So, maybe that's something for our listeners to consider, is sure, share with your closest, share vulnerably, share from the heart. But also, if you have an open conversation in a more social setting, social audio, like we recently started going on Chatter, and Chatter's similar to Clubhouse, where you have different rooms, different topics, but it really is a safe space because you don't know people there, right? So it's, and again, maybe sharing your story in that sort of platform, maybe that helps one person, two people, three people, who knows? But how would you feel about sharing on social audio, Stace?
Tool for me. It's helped me face some things about myself that I might not otherwise have faced. It's definitely been a space for me to share my journey, the story of what happened with my son, how it impacted me, how I recovered. Um, it Social media sharing has been something really beautiful for me. I wouldn't recommend it to everybody. Not everybody's going to feel that space of connection in a public setting. But I definitely think that if you're somebody who's looking to share, there is a space for that on social media with apps like Clubhouse and Chatter, for sure.
Beautiful. Yeah, no, like I said, it impacted me, and it was a really safe space to share. So, and me and Stace hold rooms. Started to do on Chatter at least once a week. We'll probably still do Clubhouse. So we definitely like to give that safe space for people to share from the heart. So reach out if you want to join us on those platforms. We also have the monthly Zoom, which again we like to create a safe space for people, and most of that is in the group chat. But also we like to give that safe space for people to heal and kind of share vulnerably. So yeah, we love creating those spaces too. But if you need some guidance, you need some help, because the programs we do, the mentorship also does encourage. We do encourage people. Where are you going to share your story? What's the platform look like? Is it right? Is it writing a book? Is it social media? Is that you've been through so much? And when you've gone through so much, helping people on their journey gives you some kind of purpose too. So I definitely encourage people to share where they feel comfortable sharing, but also to stretch yourself and push yourself. And Stacey, now I'm going to come to you and ask you for some general prompts soon. But let me just, if I was to just summarize, right, the key discussion point is really the power of vulnerability. When you share from the heart, it helps you grow spiritually. And letting go of your ego, because your ego is not a bad thing. It just wants to keep you safe. It wants to keep you grounded. But when you share vulnerably, you stop kidding yourself, and it's really healing as you release, because the truth will set you free. So as you share, it just allows you to heal at a much deeper level. And just if you think about one-to-one relationships, when you share from the heart, again, you're building a strong connection where people can feel what you're saying. Clearly, we talked about journaling and speak in the mirror, and for me also meditation, right? Being in that space of truly listening to my heart and soul allows me to become centered, and it allows me that how I do one thing is how I do everything. So, Stacey, as we close out this episode, I always love asking you any final thoughts, but also any journal prompts you have for our listeners.
I would say the place to start is, if you didn't have a filter, a part of yourself, what would you share? To start and journal about it. If you didn't have to have a filter, if you weren't judging yourself and you were just to share something about yourself, what would it be and what would that look like? And where would you do it?
Nice, nice. I guess the one I'd add is how if you were to embrace vulnerability, how would that help you grow spiritually and emotionally? Lisa, I love sharing this space with you. I love everything we get to do. As I've said a few times, if people need guidance on this journey, then maybe book a free discovery call. We love what we get to do. We love guiding people on their journey. And, I get the feeling sometimes people think that because they hear us on podcasts and stuff, maybe we're not approachable or whatever. We love doing the one-to-one work. We love guiding people on their spiritual journeys. It's so beautiful to see people shining the light and to be vulnerable and sharing so authentically. It just lifts my soul when people are truly guiding themselves, but also guiding others.
Well, and let's just add to that. Maybe it's time to be vulnerable and book the discovery call, and to humble yourself enough to say, I can't do this on my own. I need support. And I'm going to book a free discovery call because I'm ready to be open and vulnerable. I'm ready to take this next step. That's a big thing.
Good point. Yeah, maybe take that leap. Sending everyone so much love and light. Thank you for sharing this space with us. We look forward to doing more and more of these episodes. I've been talking to Stacey about me and Stacey doing at least one episode a week, and then still doing some guest ones. So you're probably going to see more episodes from us. If there's any topics you'd like us to cover, let us know. I'm sending everyone so much love and light. And Stacey, I'm going to hand over to you to close out.
Thanks, everybody, for being here. Another great episode. We'll see you soon. Bye for now.
Sending love and light. Bye for now.